Good afternoon. You're watching City News 24/7. I'm Faiza Mean.
And I'm Melanie Ng. Canada may have dodged a bullet yesterday when Donald Trump announced a new round of tariffs. However, Mark Carney says the remaining levies against our country will still pose significant threats to workers and businesses.
All right, let's bring in our Glen McGregor, who's starting the day off in Ottawa. So Glen, Carney held a meeting today with provincial leaders. What are we learning about these discussions?
Yeah, they obviously discussing the impact of these latest tariffs and the fact that, as you said, Canada did kind of dodge the tariffs that have been imposed on so many other countries. But Carney coming out to kind of describe the state of play right now and listing essentially three forms of tariffs that are now affecting Canada. The first round, these are the ones announced back last year, the so-called fentanyl tariffs, the 25% on all Canadian products and the 10% on Canadian energy that is exported into the United States. Those are largely in abeyance right now. There's an exemption that was put in for products that are traded and exported under the USMCA. That is a large part of the cross-border trade, and those companies that aren't currently USMCA compliant can do some paperwork to get registered. So those are less of a concern. The 25% tariffs on both Canadian-made steel and aluminum, though, those are in effect, and Canada has responded with retaliatory tariffs of about a total of about $60 billion of U.S. goods. And then the tariffs that came in last night in the auto sector. This is where it gets kind of complicated because there is a carve-out for vehicles that are made under the USMCA. But what the Americans are proposing to do is tariff at the rate of 25% any parts that are made in those vehicles outside of the United States. That is, so we have a Chrysler minivan that may be assembled in the United States but has parts that are made in Canada. Those parts will be tariffed at 25%, but not just yet because the U.S. government is trying to figure out exactly how to do this. And Carney really saying that the relationship between Canada and the United States that has existed for a very long time, including the Auto Pact, which dates back to 1965, he notes that's the year he was born, so a 60-year trade relationship that preceded even the free trade agreement between Canada and the U.S. and the NAFTA and the current USMCA, essentially a violation of that. But he also says this is really going to have a destructive effect for not just Canada, but for the entire world. Listen to a little bit of what he said this morning.
Yesterday's actions by the U.S. administration, while not specifically targeting Canada, will rupture the global economy and adversely affect global economic growth. The global economy is fundamentally different today than it was yesterday. The system of global trade anchored on the United States that Canada has relied on since the end of the Second World War, a system that, while not perfect, has helped to deliver prosperity for our country for decades, is over.
Now, Carney today announcing that Canada is going to hit back to retaliate proportionally with our own tariffs on U.S.-made vehicles coming into Canada, but he is not going to put the tariffs on parts because that's obviously a very complicated equation to kind of work out. And he also crucially said that it will not apply to Mexico because Mexico, he says, is compliant with the USMCA, is still observing it and is abiding by it in the spirit that it was negotiated. So it's not going to be Mexican made vehicles or tariffs or parts that are going to be tariffed, but those that are made in the United States. We're going to see how this works out. This is a complicated thing to put in place. It's one thing to talk about how you're going to do it, but actually putting it into force, much more complicated. Carney also saying that any revenues that are generated by those tariffs on American-made vehicles, keep in mind, that's money that Canadians will pay that will increase the sticker price of those vehicles in Canada. He says any of that money will be used for relief for businesses and workers who are adversely affected. Now, this obviously resonating right across the campaign trail. Pierre Poilievre, it was in the Oshawa area today. He also was asked about this, and he has a proposal to waive the GST on Canadian-made vehicles. Again, the same problem here. How do you determine what exactly is a Canadian-made vehicle because these cars cross the borders so many times? But he says this would save somewhere between around $2,500 on a $50,000 vehicle, and he's also encouraging provincial premiers to do the same, waiving their provincial sales tax, or HST, on those vehicles as well. Listen to his rationale for taking the GST off vehicles.
Axing the GST on a $50,000 Canadian-made automobile will save $2,500 to the car buyer. By saving cash-strapped Canadians, families, their hard-earned money, we will increase demand for Canadian-made cars and keep more workers on the job. And I'm calling on the premiers to match our policy and remove their portion of provincial sales tax on Canadian-made automobiles.
Now, expect this to be a major topic of discussion when the leaders participate in something called the 5 chefs, the 5 leaders, which is sort of like a debate, except it's between each leader and a series of journalists from Radio Canada that is being taped tonight. The leaders will all be there with the exception of Poilievre, who's connecting by video conference, I understand. So Carney is heading to Montreal to do this. So is Jagmeet Singh. This is going to be a real test of Carney's French language skills. And there's also going to be questions to all the leaders, not just about the trade situation with the United States, but some issues that are more important to Quebec. And we see some of the polls right now showing, some of them showing the Liberals amassing a pretty big lead on both the Conservatives and the Bloc Québécois in that province. So this is an opportunity for the Liberals to pick up some more seats beyond the 33 seats they currently have there right now. And this is something, if they can add a lot, almost assure that they would win. But they will get, Carney will get questions about his remarks last week about potentially a federal government intervention at the Supreme Court level if Bill 96, that's Quebec's new language law, kind of a modern version of Bill 101 that some folks might remember from the 1980s, if that ultimately goes to the Supreme Court, would the federal government intervene? Carney says he would intervene only on constitutional issues. It's a really thorny issue in Quebec, and he's got to be careful with this one. The other issue that could come up tonight also is gun control. This is something that happens in every election campaign. Montreal is very sensitive to this issue because of the École Polytechnique massacre in 1989. And Carney sort of bumbled recently on the first week of the campaign when he referred to one of the candidates that he has running in the Montreal area who was a survivor of the École Polytechnique massacre. And he also screwed up the name of the school because he said it happened at Concordia University, not École Polytechnique. So he's going to be better briefed on that one tonight, and he'll have to have an answer for that. So too will Pierre Poilievre, because gun control has been a difficult issue for the Conservatives, especially in the province of Quebec. So we'll watch what happens there tonight, Mel Fiza, at 8 p.m. on our colleagues at network at Radio Canada.
All right, another busy day on the campaign trail. That is our Glen McGregor in Ottawa. Glen, thank you.